Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
We're back for another week.
Hey.
Again.
We're
every week.
And we're on a timer. So today's story, but no. But we do have you have a hockey game you're trying to watch. I have
important in hockey, yes.
I have pizza on my mind, and like if pizza's a dinner option, like doing this show is really hard.
Pizza on my mind is going to be one of my hit singles if I ever become a recording artist.
It's probably the most true love song ever written.
That's the thing. Good music speaks to everybody.
Yeah. I find yourself a girl who makes you feel the way pizza makes you feel. Like kind
to get
gross
home to enjoy it, and yeah. But then you feel bad afterwards.
Like really just greasy and wrong and ashamed. Like that's the relationship you want. But yeah, non-essential podcast. If you haven't listened before, every week me and Steve get together and tell each other stories. They can be about anything. We don't have quality control here. We can't afford it.
It's because it's also good. I mean,
yeah, anything you can find on the internet's got to be good, right?
Right.
For instance, like my story is about a woman named Walburga, so you know it's about murder.
Oh, good. That's going to fit in with my... Yeah, last week, I had a heart-lifting story about a unfortunately named woman who was murdered by a abusive spouse, but the circumstances around it were really weird. And then this week, I've got a more interesting story that's way, at least equally... It's probably more depressing.
Yeah.
But...
yeah, mine won't pick you up much either. But it is one of the... death is involved and adultery. In that way, it's a little reminiscent about a story I told a few weeks back. But this is probably one of the weirdest stories I've come across doing this show. We're 47 episodes in, and we finally hit the oddest thing I think I've read. So Walburga Korschel, which, again, I don't care if you are from Germany. That's a fucked up name to give someone.
Well, you know that... She sounds like the evil twin of a good person named Burga. It's like Burga and Waburga.
It's just Mario and Wario logic. So she was born in Germany in 1880. And then at some point into her young adult years, she moved to Wisconsin. And people must have picked up on how dumb of a name Walburga is because they just started calling her Dolly.
So not even like... Just Burga or Berta or something. It's just Dolly.
Or Wally or fucking anything. By her early 30s, she married the owner of a Milwaukee apron factory, a Fred Oesterreich. Fred was kind of the stereotypical inattentive provider of that time. You know, like he was successful, but he worked long hours, and if he had any free time, he was usually spending it drinking with his friends rather than spending time with Dolly. Setting the stage for any happy marriage. So anyway, one day in autumn, Dolly called Fred and told him that her sewing machine was broken and to see if he could send somebody over from his factory to fix it. She seemed to know that Fred would send over the company's 17-year-old repairman, Otto Sandhuber, because when he arrived, she greeted him wearing nothing but a silk robe and stockings. This began...
Well, that's how you...
Yeah.
I've seen late night TV.
Yeah. So this began an affair that mostly revolved around meeting in hotel rooms or at Otto's place at a boarding house. But Dolly eventually wanted Otto at her place and in her husband's bed. Neighbors would ask often about this young man coming and going, but Dolly would say Otto was her half-brother who could be a bit of a wanderer or vagabond. But the attention forced Dolly to come up with a very great, awful goddamn plan. She decided Otto should quit his job and live in the Oesterreich attic. He'd almost never be spotted coming or going, but he would also become completely dependent on Dolly, as he had virtually no family around or connections outside of her. She gave him a bed and a desk up there with the criteria that he couldn't leave the attic without her say and couldn't really leave the house at all. This lasted for 5 years.
So, I mean, here's how double standards work in our society, but it's like I hear this and it seems like just kind of not funny, haha, but like kind of groan-worthy funny. But it's really not that much different than that thing like the guy in Cleveland a few years back that had 3 girls locked up in the basement. It's more mentally abusive, it sounds like, but not even necessarily abusive. I haven't heard that part of your story yet, but
it's
very controlling.
Yeah, like the thing about like the basement keeping stuff, like those are stories of like actual like, you know, like there's a level of physical abuse there, right. And like this to Otto's. You know, Otto is a victim in some ways in the story, but like he voluntarily goes along with this, and you
sure,
and we
at least initially, but like you pointed out, what happens is you very quickly kind of get in a situation where you're dependent.
Yeah. So for 5 years, Otto lived in this attic without much incident. During the day, while Fred was at work, he'd be having sex with Dolly or helping her with her chores. Or he would just like keep himself busy making bathtub gin, I guess. You know, because you've got to be a little fucked up.
I can get behind it,
you know, on a day-to-day basis to make this work. During the night, Otto would read mystery novels or write stories for pulp magazines that Dolly would take to go get published under the name Walter Klein. Fred would ask Dolly sometimes about unexplained noises and shadows seeming to move in the upstairs window, and Fred began to really think he was either losing his mind or the place was flat out fucking haunted.
So he didn't go up to look, he was just like, that's weird.
Yeah.
I get it. Attics are scary. Like I've been in mine. We've owned this house 15 years. I think I've been in mine like 3 times. Mine's not scary. Mine's just gross. It's
I was stunned to find out. Like literally like a week ago, I looked in my closet and like, wait, holy shit, I have an attic. I'm not going fucking up there because it's the spiders now. But that's how most of my homes have been. Is like I find out we have one years after the fact. So Fred thought he was losing his mind, so he decided it was time to move from Milwaukee to L.A. And Dolly oddly only requested that the new house have an attic. Although these weren't super common in L.A., Fred managed to find a house that had one. So Dolly, before she moved, she gave Otto money to kind of get started. It was the money he made from his short stories, so I guess he was something of a successful writer, better than me. And she sent him on a train to L.A. He got his own apartment, and he worked as a janitor, all the while waiting for Dolly to move into her new home. So he had a fucking apartment and a job again, and said, this is just temporary until I can live in a fucking attic.
It makes you wonder if he was kind of like getting off on that whole situation too. Like, I mean, for some people that's like the allure of it.
Yeah, but that's just the craziest thing in the world to me is like he got out. Like he was a fucking human being again. He was like, nah, I want to live in her attic still. I feel safe. So Fred got a new factory in LA and life continued, but not too long after their move, the toxic marriage was getting obviously ugly now. One August night, Fred and Dolly had gotten into a big argument at a party, and the fight continued all the way back home. Otto overheard the arguing and feared for Dolly's safety and burst into the room they were arguing in, brandishing 2 pistols. A shocked, furious Fred recognized Otto, and a struggle broke out, and the guns went off, hitting Fred 3 times. So Dolly acted fast, and had Otto secure her in the closet and lock the door from the outside. He then took Fred's diamond watch and guns and returned to his attic. Neighbors called the police after hearing the shots, where they found a distraught Dolly in the closet. The cops didn't really believe her tale of it being a random robbery turned murder, but they couldn't find the murder weapon, let alone the murderer, who was just upstairs. Yeah, like
we searched everywhere on the ground floor.
right. Like I'm pretty sure a murder scene, cops are allowed to look up in the attic. Like,
well, especially if you say it was breaking and entering, like you want to make sure that the residence is, safe now.
If I were ever a
Right.
detective, I would specifically think he's probably still in the attic.
I mean, I guess that we can joke that, but you think if you even remotely think it was a home invasion robbery style thing, you wouldn't really be thinking that they're still
Right.
around.
Right, but it specifically
but you
says
gotta
they didn't believe that.
Yeah, plus even if you did believe it, you're operating under the assumption that maybe you got there and surprised them and they're hiding from you. Like,
Yeah.
maybe they hadn't left yet. So yeah, crack police work there.
Yeah. So they didn't check the attic for whatever reason, and the lack of evidence that was apparent around there gave Dolly and Otto a free fucking pass. Dolly inherited a small fortune from Fred's death, bought a new house, and for some fucking reason decided they liked the attic arrangement so much that they went right back to it. Dolly...
Well, it obviously works. It gets you out of murder.
Apparently. Right. Dolly then took up another lover, the lawyer Herman Shapiro, who was managing her dead husband's estate. After a short while of dating, Dolly even gave Herman Fred's diamond watch that was supposedly stolen.
Hey, wait a minute.
And Herman was suspicious, but gave Dolly the benefit of the doubt because he was fucking her.
Right.
Because that's all you have to do to convince us as men. She then took a third lover. I imagine she wanted to keep this one in the basement, at this point, because it's like have one on every level of the house.
Yeah. Shit, I'm running out of space. Can you stay in the chimney?
Yeah. Rather than watch, the third lover, Roy Klum, received one of the revolvers from the murder. She asked him to dispose of it because she was afraid the police would, quote, mistake it for the one used in the murder. And so, Roy, believing her, I'm sure, threw the gun in the La Brea tar pits. And then she somehow got a neighbor to bury the other gun in his rose garden with that same story.
You'd think throwing them both in the La Brea tar pits, that's a pretty great disposal method, because...
Well, two guns. Then Roy would be like, wait, hold on a second, Missy. But one mistaken gun I can understand.
How many guns do you got? 37?
So she broke up with Roy and around 1923, and being kind of the vengeful creep that he was, that's when he decided to go to the police about the gun. No problem with a killer until she dumps you, right?
Yeah, if you're not getting some, then it's like, okay,
why am I?
That's it.
What's even the point? Dolly was arrested and had to make an awkward arrangement where Herman would have to take food to her, again, half-brother, Otto. He was supposed to knock on the ceiling 3 times of the bedroom closet where the attic was and just leave him food there. Instead, Otto, who at this point, it's been years, and was desperate to converse with fucking anyone who wasn't Dolly, came down and told Herman all the details of his 20-year-long affair. Herman told him to get out and never come back, and Otto fled to Canada, presumably in search of a happier, better attic. Meanwhile, the police couldn't tie the guns to Dolly conclusively. The revolvers had corroded, and Dolly got released on bail, and eventually all the charges would be dropped. Herman Shapiro was apparently not put off by any of this insanity and moved in with her.
That's a smart move, yeah.
Like, if there was ever a character in a story who deserved to die in, like, that horror movie way of, like, you're a fucking idiot, it was Herman. But that's not how it ended up turning out. Much like Roy, once the relationship went south, then Herman had a moral obligation to let the truth be known and to let justice have its day. He told the cops what he knew about the death of Fred Oesterreich, and warrants went out again for Dolly, and this time Otto as well. I'm not entirely sure how they managed to track Otto down. Maybe he came back from Canada, but they did manage to get him and put him on trial. Despite his time essentially being a mentally fucking damaged prisoner for Dolly, from his time just, living in a goddamn attic with no contact with the outside world. They did find Otto guilty of manslaughter, but, thanks to the 2 other boyfriends putting this shit off until they were done sleeping with this fucking psycho, the statute of limitations ran out on manslaughter and Otto was free to go.
Justice.
Dolly went to trial on a conspiracy charge, but it was a hung jury and she walked free from the indictment, with it being officially dropped a few years later in 1936, because at this point the court system was just understandably fucking tired of all this. Dolly would then enter a 30-year relationship with a man named Ray Hedrick and lived a pretty quiet life after all this. They would finally marry on April 5th, 1961, and Dolly would die 3 days later at the age of 81. It does not say if Ray slept in the attic.
14 men climbed down out of the attic to attend the funeral.
It's just like, it's a goddamn clown car.
Thought I heard poker games going on every night.
So yeah, just like, it was so weird to me, like all these openings for Otto to be like, oh cool, I can finally live, a normal life, and he's like, yeah, I'll go back in the attic.
The attic's all in it. Well, and that's kind of why I say it is different than like physically restraining and like raping somebody, but creating that dependence, he has no job, so he's got no money. It's really easy to say, oh, if you don't like it, you could just leave.
Yeah.
But it's not that easy, because where do you go?
Yeah, and just after, years of that, and like being told by your, captor that you need to hide, it's such a fucking weird thing to me. Like
now like you said, he did agree to it in the first place, and that blows my mind. Like, I can't imagine. I mean, she must have been great in bed or something.
Yeah, he was like 17. He's thinking like, hey, I can get all the sex I want. But it's like, dude, you can, people will sleep with you. Like, you can have a normal relationship and a home.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. You had a job and shit. Like, maybe you didn't like living in a boarding house, but it probably beat a fucking attic at the end of the day.
I just can't imagine the creepiness of being like, this woman that I'm having an affair with, her husband's literally living his life underneath me, and I'm hiding in the attic the whole time. Like,
oh, you have to imagine, like, it was probably perpetually nerve-wracking.
Yeah, nerve-wracking, but also like a constant reminder of like what you are and what you're doing.
You're a weird fucking sex golem we keep in a fucking cave.
It blows my mind, though, that she set up like a couch so there's like obviously like a living quarters situation upstairs.
Yeah.
I mean, there had to be some kind of like bathroom situation, even if it was like obviously a bucket or something, unless he was just that good at holding it until. Yeah,
you just train your bowel clock to only go when he's at work.
He's at work. What? He called off sick today. Fuck.
God damn it.
I shouldn't have had Taco Bell last night.
It's the weekend. Oh my God, what do I do?
But it's also hilarious that you mentioned that the husband's like, there seem to be noises and shadows in the attic.
Yeah.
But let's move without even going up there and looking.
To be fair, I kind of get that, because it's like, if I hear some spooky noises above me, there's no way I'm checking it out. Like, I'm gonna just be like, oh, it's the demon. Okay.
I'm one of those people that would be like, it's got to be a raccoon and we got to take care of it. I'll go up there. And I'd be terrified the whole time, but trying to act like I'm not. And then the monster would like lop my head off.
But that's the thing. Like, I would be more willing to check out a creepy attic if I thought it was a ghost. What would terrify me is if it is a raccoon. Because right. I'm not confident I can win that fight. So.
Good point. That's all she said. She's like, shadows and noises. She's like, raccoons. He's like, fuck, we're moving.
She just like loses all respect for him when the raccoon's just flipping him around.
Yeah, suddenly her like wanting to sleep with this other guy makes a lot more sense. She's like, my husband's a pansy.
He's a fucking bitch. He won't even take care of a raccoon. But yeah, that's the story of Walburga. Walburga Dolly.
Perfect name for somebody like that, too.
Yeah.
But I am picturing her with the Waluigi mustache.
Walburga does sound like a old mythological monster that would be obsessed with sex. The Wahlberg, like you would fight it in the new God of War.
You know, it's funny because it's completely unfair, but it's how us people work. You hear the story about this woman that all these guys like fell for. Not just the one that, like, obviously the guy that lived in the attic for 20 plus years. It's like, wow, he was under some spell. But then these other guys that were like, oh, they basically figured out right away that she murdered her husband, but they were cool with it until she stopped fucking them. Yeah. So she's like some siren or whatever, but then she's got a name like Wahlberga, and it's the least attractive name I've ever heard.
I mean, like, I'm not. I don't want to, just completely pass, physical judgment. But for me personally, like, there's a ton of photos of her. Like, I don't fucking get it at all.
Yeah, no, that's what I was looking at that when you were telling the story, because of course that's the first thing you think and be like, man, she must be gorgeous.
Because you hear
there was like
story,
a couple pictures when she was younger, and it's like she's not bad, but not like.
But you hear this story
in the attic for 20 years.
Yeah, you hear this story, you're thinking of like some femme fatale, like Nor shit. Like,
yeah, and then she kind of ends up looking like one of these like well-to-do Jewish moms, like with the gaudy. I don't know why it has to be Jewish, because all the older women I know that dress like that are not Jewish, but but that's what I picture. It's like something out of one of those like old TV shows where the kids the mom's like, eat your food, this and that. Yeah. Whatever. Like, yeah, it doesn't seem like let's ignore some murder to get some situation.
Yeah, it's a very weird,
and like you said, I'm not sitting here being like, we should judge everybody on physical appearance, but when you hear a story about these guys that are like so
like lust obsessed, like,
right.
It really just goes to show that like fucking men's sexual appetites have very little to do with like actual appearance.
It's just, can I get some? Yes.
Yeah. All I have to do is hide a gun? Awesome. This will be easy.
Yeah, for any of the kids listening out there, if somebody asks you to hide a gun for them, don't do it.
You do it immutely.
Well, you probably take it from them because you don't want to say no and then they shoot you with said gun.
Yeah, you act like you're going to do it, then you take the gun, then you point the gun at them, and then you rob them.
Who's got the gun now?
Yeah, you shouldn't have handed me a gun, dipshit. Now I'm in charge. So there you go.
Wahlberga. Mine is also a murder story. And it's funny because it's very similar to two different. We've talked about this before. We've both done stories where like you have to like sit here and say, God, did we cover this already? Is this something been said? And then it kind of like came into focus for me. There's two different stories that you did that this like kind of mirrors, but it's a new one.
Great.
So
watch history repeat itself on this show
over and over, but only the worst of history.
Yeah.
So Nathan Leopold grew up in Kenwood, which was an affluent area of Chicago in the early 1900s. His father had inherited a large shipping company, but had also opened a successful aluminum can and box manufacturing plant, which makes me think his father was a mobster, but that's not part of the story. As far as I know, he's not. Leopold was a brilliant kid, and at the age of 15, he began studying at the University of Chicago. He was also known as a expert ornithologist, which is a bird person. But it's pretty noteworthy to be known as an expert in a field when you're 15 years old. And he had multiple papers published in the country's leading ornithology publication, which we all know is called the Auk.
Yeah. I read that every week.
Yeah. I just can't bring myself to cancel that subscription. There's so much great ornithology.
So many 15-year-olds who overachieve.
So that's Nathan Leopold. Richard Loeb also grew up in Kenwood. He was the son of the vice president of the Sears, Roebuck and Company, which threw me off because we all know what Sears is, and we've heard Sears and Roebuck. But it's Sears, Roebuck, and Company. So they had a party. But therefore, he was also from a very wealthy family. In fact, by the age of 15, Loeb's personal wealth was already estimated at $10 million. And this would have been around like 1920. So that's $10 million, $1920. But Loeb was also a good student, and he enrolled in the University of Chicago also at the age of 15. And that's where Loeb would first befriend Leopold. Leopold did well at the university. Loeb found it harder to study given the age difference between him and most of the other students. Unlike Leopold, who was boisterous, outgoing and boastful, Loeb was a lot more reserved and described as misanthropic. He just didn't like other people or being around other people.
Healthy.
So it's all, yeah. I mean, it's always nice to have a story subject each week that I identify with.
Yeah.
But so after 2 years of earning like barely average grade, he wasn't flunking out, but he wasn't exceeding. Loeb transferred to the University of Michigan there in Ann Arbor. His grades failed to improve. He was more interested in drinking and reading dime novels than his studies. So again,
hell yeah, dude.
like, I know he's sounding cooler and cooler, but that'll change. But he did manage to graduate. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, he was a millionaire, and that'll tend to get you through any university.
Yeah. But also, like, you talk about, like, grades failing and stuff. Like, that's around the age that shit happens. Like, that's,
Because you're finding all these other interests. And
yeah, and you realize, like, it's a lot of this shit they're having you do is bullshit. So it's hard to be motivated. Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't like he was struggling in school because he wasn't actually smart. It's just he didn't really care, and he didn't particularly like people, and he was just a generally, kind of unhappy person.
Again, we can identify with our hero of this story, and this is a heroic tale, I can tell.
Uh-huh. So after graduating from Michigan, Loeb returned to Chicago and re-enrolled in the University of Chicago, taking postgraduate courses in history. And to me, this feels kind of like that thing where you graduated, but you don't really want to do anything, so you just go back to school.
Yeah.
Yeah. But by the end of 1923, Loeb and Leopold were kind of reunited. Like I said, they were friends initially, and then he left to Michigan. But when he was back in Chicago, they kind of hooked back up, and their friendship soon grew into a more intimate relationship.
Sock'em
Leopold,
boppers?
Yes.
Awesome.
Rock'em sock'ems. Leopold was attracted to Loeb's good looks and his rebellious attitude. Loeb would often commit random destructive crimes just because he could, things like car theft and arson and smashing store windows, etc. So at this point, he's starting to sound like, and I'm so bad with names, this goes back to our video game days, but the Night in the Woods whole thing, where it's let's go commit crimes.
Hell yeah, dude. I love those characters.
Yeah, Leopold was attracted to that. Loeb's affection for Leopold didn't seem to be quite as strong. Given Loeb's general dislike for other people as a whole, that's not that surprising. Loeb found Leopold's constant bragging annoying. One of the articles pointed out is Leopold would often boast that he could speak 15 different languages. He couldn't, and Loeb knew that, but but that's just the kind of person Leopold was. He's
just full of, I think we've all either have people currently in our circles like that, or we've had them before. It's just like everything they say is full of shit, but you just
and again, especially at that age, you think back to this point, they're like 19, I think 19 or 20. The other thing that annoyed Loeb about Leopold is Leopold's had an obsession with Friedrich Nietzsche, which, again, a lot of these people, that's like very common, I think I'm so smart thing, is to get into this kind of stuff. Leopold was enraptured by Nietzsche's theory of the Übermensch, or Superman, basically the idea that there existed some men who, by their mere superiority, justified the entire existence of humans, as a whole.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not I am not a philosophy major, and so I did my best to look it up and try to translate it in a term that I would understand. But yeah, it's this idea that there's just people out there that are just on a whole different plane from the rest of humanity.
Yeah, which never... Great philosophy, because it never would spark any sort of fucking divisive, evil fucking
right,
outlook.
Nobody's ever turned that into a bad... And from what my understanding is in Nietzsche's theory and his works, it's not like this Aryan race thing, but it's the kind of work that was just used to justify the Aryan race stuff.
That's the thing about philosophers is they'll just casually drop some shit that's like, you know how fucking evil that's going to be taken, right?
Right. So basically, these people would become masters of themselves, and they'd shed the herd morality of, say, Christianity, and instead they'd adopt their own morality codes because they were just, they were better people. They didn't need things like... It's like, again, specifically says Christianity, but I think they really mean more the norms of society. Like, you were above that.
Right.
Leopold, who insisted that he was, of course, a Superman, took this to mean as such, that he was above all else, including laws. He could do whatever he wanted because his status guaranteed it. Loeb did not. He was annoyed by him going off on these philosophical whatevers, like I think most of us would be. And he didn't seem to agree with Leopold's ramblings, per se, but he was a man that certainly enjoyed doing whatever he wanted. He might not have justified it the same way, but kind of the same ends. The only thing that really truly seemed to bring Loeb pleasure was increasingly risky crime, like, just the thrill of getting away with stuff.
Yeah.
So this is going to be headed in a great direction.
Yeah.
While there were many things about Leopold that bugged Loeb, he did enjoy having somebody along for the ride, and Leopold's adoration and participation kind of justified Loeb's actions to him. So it's one of those things.
It's always easier to have, like,
it's a
tag team, instead of like trying to do bad shit yourself. If somebody tells you, like, hell yeah, dude, do it.
And it's not necessarily because you need a second person to get away with it. It's a comfort thing. So that was really that seems to be their relationship. Leopold was kind of head over heels for Loeb, and Loeb was more of this is a convenient, like, I hate everybody, but I hate you less than the rest of the people type thing. On the evening of November 10th, 1923, the pair decided to make the drive from Chicago to Ann Arbor, where they'd break in and burglarize Loeb's former fraternity house. However, the crime only netted them about $80 in, like, loose change. They said loose change, but that had to be bills. But and some watches and penknives and a typewriter. So they,
that's all right. Like, frat houses are fucking annoying. So,
well, and then you think about it, he was like 15. I guess he would have been 17 by the time he transferred to Michigan. But he was like the little kid in a frat house, so that would be an interesting.
Yeah. No, if you want to fuck with frat houses, I'm okay with that.
On the drive home, Leopold was very upset over the meager take, which seemed hardly worth the 12-hour round-trip drive. Loeb probably didn't mind, given that he was driven more by the thrill of getting away with something rather than the crime itself. So for Loeb, it wasn't really about what did
the money on the way out.
Yeah, fuck it. Take that, alpha beta pi. I don't know.
Alpha beta pie.
Yeah, alpha beta pie. It's the
delicious.
It's the every. It gives the name of the fraternity in one of the articles, but I didn't. It's unimportant. But so while Leopold was stewing over this going all this way for basically nothing, Loeb was already thinking about his next crime. So when Leopold finally calmed down, Loeb would spend the rest of the drive home outlining his plans. Sure, they had pulled off a number of successful burglaries and arsons, but he was kind of upset that none of it had ever had any real consequence. In fact, he pointed out that nothing that they did ever...
It's not real if I don't get shot.
Well, his thing is almost as... Yeah, he was mad that none of the crimes that they'd ever done had even made the papers. So he wanted to commit a crime that would have all of Chicago talking. And with their superior intelligence, he plotted out how they could pull off the perfect crime. It had to be something major, and what could be bigger than kidnapping and murdering a child, and then collecting ransom money from the victim's family. So that's a bit of a jump from burglarizing frat houses. I can only guess at their motives, because... Again, Leopold was strictly driven by the thrill of getting away with things, and he hated people already, so killing somebody, even if it was going to be a child, probably wouldn't be much of a moral problem for him.
Yeah.
And the attention that it would surely, get would stoke his ego, and that's all what he was about. And while Leopold shared Loeb's disregard for human life, I think in his view, it was more because he viewed himself as a person of such esteem that, in his mind, it justified taking a life if it served some purpose of his, such as pleasing your lover. So again, it's like you got two different people that kind of had two different internal rationalizations, but they both came to the same conclusion that, yes, we should murder a child.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
It would be great if the child, like, they thought it was the easy one, and then the child killed them. And, like, that's how fucking great they thought they were.
Well, on May 21st, 1924, so it would have been about 6 months after they came up with this plan, Leopold and Loeb rented a car and began trolling the streets of Chicago looking for a victim, because apparently planning the perfect crime doesn't include picking out a victim ahead of time. And so they drove around for almost 2 hours without any luck and were apparently ready to just abandon the plan altogether and try again some other time.
There's a few stories like this, like especially like serial killers, like trying to plan the perfect murder and stuff. But it's like, to me, it's like, you know, the perfect murder would also have a motive. You know, it wouldn't just be a random, like, you would know who you wanted to die because they pissed you off or something. Like,
well, that's the trick of getting away with it, because as morbid as the thought is, I've had the thought before that if you were truly, like, drive from here to, like, 6 hours over and just shoot a random person walking down the street and leave, it would be a lot easier to get away with. You know, I mean, you could still obviously
if it's
get caught.
random chaos, then yeah, it's easier to get away with it. But to me, it's like, that's not, you know, these guys,
perfect crime.
Yeah,
because you didn't accomplish anything but killing somebody, which is relatively easy to do.
Yeah, like, people die all the time. That's the thing. Like, these guys are trying to, like, make a name for themselves, but it's like, before now, I haven't heard their fucking name.
Right.
So you're just lumped into a group of other fucking psychopaths.
And again, I would think if your whole philosophy is we're so much smarter than everybody else, I bet we could pull off this grand crime and not get caught. You would think part of that would be planning it more than let's just find some random person and kill him.
I'm just saying, like, you're going for the perfect crime. Michael Myers murdered a ton of people in those Halloween movies and got blown up and is still okay.
And had a movie made about him.
Like, he's still fine.
Yeah.
Like, they've shot him, they've stabbed him in the eyes. He just keeps coming. That's the perfect murder.
Okay. And then it was funny to me that they drove around for 2 hours and were about to give up, because I'm not sure how much effort is a normal amount of effort to expend when looking for somebody to murder, but I guess it's less than 120 minutes. Like, I can't imagine you're all psyched up like, yeah, we're just going to murder some random asshole. Let's go kill him. And then 2 hours later, you're like, God, this is a lot of work. Let's go home.
Really, the perfect murder is that kind of Halloween thing where it's like everyone knows who killed him. That we just can't do shit about it.
Get him, right?
We can't stop him. That would be anyway, if you were on a higher tier of humanity.
Right, if you were an Ubermensch or a Superman or whatever.
Yeah, you were Thor.
So anyway, they were about to give up, but when Loeb suddenly spotted his 14-year-old cousin, Bobby Franks, walking home from school. Loeb knew that Bobby's father was wealthy and thus would be able to afford the $10,000 ransom that they planned on demanding. And so he directed Leopold to turn the car around and pull up alongside Bobby. Loeb offered his cousin a ride home, but Bobby was already almost home, and so he said, nah, I'm almost home already.
Yeah.
Undeterred, Loeb said that he wanted to talk to Bobby about a tennis racket he'd seen him using because he was thinking of buying one for himself or something stupid like that. And he wondered if Bobby wouldn't mind joining him for a minute or so they could discuss it. Bobby hesitated, but only for a moment, and then got in the front passenger seat of the car. Not a smart move. Leopold was in the driver's seat, and Loeb sat in the back seat behind him. Loeb asked if Bobby knew Leopold, because, they had been friends and been, I guess, dating. I don't know how open they were about the romantic part of the relationship, but Bobby said he didn't know him. And then he asked Bobby if he wouldn't mind taking a ride with him around the block, and Bobby said sure. Which, again, would be horrible, except for he's your cousin, so you're thinking, yeah, it's probably a little weird, but whatever. Loeb made small talk with his cousin, who was turned around in the front seat to face him, while Leopold slowly began, making his way around the streets of Chicago. As they chatted, Loeb fumbled to find something he had stashed in the back seat with him. For a moment, he thought he had lost it or left it behind, but then he found what he was looking for. A metal chisel. The blade had been taped up so it could be used as a grip, leaving the heavy metal handle free to be wielded like a club. Which seems weird as hell to me because you already have a weapon and you're like, let's tape up the dangerous end and then use the other end. But that's whatever.
The multi-murder tool.
Yeah. Leopold made a turn, and I think Bobby must have realized something was amiss, like they weren't going around the block or whatever, because he turned to look, out the front window, and Loeb sees the opportunity, reaching one hand around his cousin to cover his mouth to prevent him from screaming, and using the other hand to bash him with the blunt end of the chisel. I'll spare the details, but when the first blow failed to knock the boy unconscious, which is what Loeb assumed would happen, he struck him with a number of follow-up blows. One of these gouged a large cut in the boy's face, which began spouting an enormous amount of blood that splattered all over the vehicle and windows and Leopold's clothing. Loeb couldn't believe it, but his cousin was still struggling and making noise. So in a fit of either panic or rage or both, Loeb lifted the boy out of the seat and dragged him into the back, where he stuffed a rag as far down the boy's throat as he could and taped his mouth shut. Bobby finally stopped moving shortly after that, so I think he ended up...
do anything to, I'm trying to think like a fucking murderer, and that's my first problem, but, how does, two fucking grown men fucking up, somebody to just, how does that prove your superiority? How does that...
And then they couldn't even do it right because they assumed that we're so good, one strike to the head and this kid will be... They probably didn't think one strike will kill him, but it'll knock him out and then we can cut him up or do whatever we want.
These are people who, they would get in their first fist fight and be amazed they didn't knock the person out in one punch.
When they push their fist at him.
Yeah.
That's what's called a callback, kids. You'll have to go back and listen to prior episodes.
That we don't remember.
Yeah, the first part of their perfect murder was less than perfect. But after some trouble, they did finally manage to kill a child, despite no obvious help from their superior intellects, like you just said. Leopold and Loeb drove until they found a rural culvert several miles outside of Chicago. There they doused the boy's face and groin for some reason with acid and stuffed the body, in the culvert before making their way back home.
No one can ever identify a person
just in case somebody
way.
Recognizes this 14-year-old boy's penis.
What the yeah, the mom's I'm just not sure. Oh, yeah, that's his cock.
My guess is that they thought, that it'd make it hard to identify if it's a boy or a girl, which makes it harder to identify the body. But
that's your
not
superior intellect.
Yeah.
You don't think they fucking think of biology when they find a body?
So anyway, they stuffed his body in the culvert and made their way back to Chicago. Before the evening was over, they'd dropped a ransom note in the mail. This part of their genius plan called for Bobby's father or somebody, whoever, to deliver the ransom by throwing a sack containing $10,000 off of a train that traveled along the elevated line on the south side of the city. They'd be waiting in a car under the bridge so that they could collect the money once it was thrown. And that just seems really weird to me. I get that the idea is that the person delivering the ransom is stuck on the train and they won't be able to ID or follow you, but it still requires a very specific drop-off point and time. So if you're worried about being caught, it would still be very fucking easy to tell the police, hey, come here at this point. This is where they want me to drop the money. So this whole weird, let's go through this train thing and have them throw it out the window off of a bridge just seems like overkill at that point. Just be
yeah,
whatever. But again, they're super smart, so maybe I'm not on the same intellectual
all
level.
These super genius criminals are always end up being just the fucking dumbest pieces of shit, because smart people don't actually they're good at rationalizing and recognizing their worst impulses and being you know what, that's actually a fucking terrible, evil idea.
Yeah. Well, by the time that they had arrived back in Chicago, Bobby's family was already aware that he was missing, and so the police were already investigating. Little did the cops know, but it had been the perfect crime, and so there would be no way to link it back to Leopold and Loeb. Leopold called Bobby's mother's the one that ended up answering, but he called their family and claimed to be a man named George Johnson, because using a fake name is, of course, necessary when committing the perfect crime.
They catch the guys who are like, hang on, neither one of them's named George Johnson. They're free to go.
That's not who called. He told her that her son had been kidnapped and that they'd soon receive instructions on how to get the boy back, which they would soon receive him because they were already on their way in the mail. Which also makes me wonder, like, they ended up murdering his cousin. What if they murdered some random fucking kid? Like, it's like, okay, now let's send the ransom note. Where do we send it? Shit. I don't know who this kid's family is.
Fuck.
We didn't think that part ahead. Whatever. Anyway, so they called and said that they'd be getting a ransom note from a George Johnson. Then they went home and cleaned the blood from the rental car before burning their clothes and disposing of the murder weapon. The typed ransom note would be received early the next day, and they were sure Mr. Franks would quickly follow the note's orders and the money would be delivered. And they'd be able to recover it completely incognito because it's the perfect crime. I might have been repeating that a few times. Unfortunately for the pair, before the note was even received, a passing motorist discovered the boy's body in the culvert, and his parents were quickly able to identify it. Generally, one doesn't pay a ransom note if they know their loved one is already dead. So at this point now, Leopold and Loeb had managed to pull off the almost perfect crime. But just as Leopold had said, the crime quickly became the talk of town. And that's exactly what Loeb wanted. You know, his crime, he's not arrested for it, and it's getting all this attention, and that's what he lives for.
Right.
After all, the abduction and the brutal murder of a 14-year-old boy for no apparent reason tends to be front-page news. After the murder, Loeb kept to himself, which is probably what you should do when you've just committed a murder and you're trying not to get caught, particularly if you're related to the victim. Leopold, on the other hand, was a braggart who loved attention and delighted in every opportunity to talk to the press. He told reporters that if he were to ever murder somebody, it would have been that cocky little son of a bitch, Bobby Franks. Because admitting you know something about your victim who you had no prior contact with is the almost perfect crime. What the pair also didn't know is that while investigating the scene where Bobby's body was found, the police had discovered a pair of eyeglasses, which wouldn't normally mean much, except for they were a pair of exceptionally rare eyeglasses that belonged to Leopold, and they had apparently fallen out of his pocket while they were dumping the body.
So having your crime, ladies and gentlemen. What kind of fucking Law and Order shit is that?
Right. If you just wore normal person glasses, it wouldn't have even mattered. But he had extremely identifiable glasses that turned up at a murder scene at the same time that you're sitting here being recorded bragging to reporters that if you were going to kill somebody, it would be the person that was found dead at said murder scene next to your glasses. Which now makes it the less than perfect crime.
One of the worst crimes, in fact. As far as execution and as far as the victim.
Police also ended up finding the typewriter, which they'd used to type the ransom note. So the pair were officially taken in for questioning. Loeb was the first to confess and told investigators that Leopold was the one that had killed Bobby. It wasn't. Trying to pin the murder on your accomplice turns out to be a great way to get said accomplice to also confess and pin the murder on you.
Perfect murder is that we trust each other and we would never throw each other under... All right, he's gone. He did it. He fucking did it.
So now it's turned into the oh shit, we're fucked crime.
We're equally fucked no matter how hard we try to turn on each other.
So the Loeb family used their wealth to hire a prominent defense attorney named Clarence Darrow. Darrow was good but not stupid, so he convinced the pair to enter a guilty plea in order to avoid the possibility of a death penalty. Because... Again, a defense attorney's job's not always to get your clients off when you know that there's no way that's going to happen.
It's to like represent them as best you can, and when it's a situation like this, it's like you guys are totally fucked. The best I can do is try to make it so they don't kill you.
Let's bring in the most expensive lawyer. What do you think? You're fucked.
The best I can do for you is like you might die in jail.
So the trial and sentencing were extensively covered by the media. Of course, both men were found guilty. They pled guilty. During their lengthy sentencing hearing, their attorney Darrow concluded with a 12-hour speech lambasting the inhumane methods of the American judicial system in the aftermath of the Great War, World War I. I'm not an expert on 1920s social issues, but I know that even a few decades earlier, these boys would have been rounded up and hanged by a posse instead of given a trial with the option to plead guilty and avoid the death sentence.
Right.
So I'm not sure what negative effects the war had on justice, but whatever it was, he was arguing for it. Darrow also used this 12-hour speech to argue that with all the gruesome tales of the wartime killing in the news and on the streets and even in their own households, honorable young boys were taught a cheap value on human lives. In other words, it's not their fault, it's society's.
This would have never happened if you understood how brilliant they are.
Yeah, so it was basically a 12-hour spiel on how children of privilege who do terrible things are actually more of a victim than their victims are. The same shit that, we still see basically every day.
I won't pretend there's not, a societal component to the fucking evils we make, but there's also personal accountability.
Right. And what gets frustrating is these kind of claims only ever seem to be made when it's children of wealthy white families.
Right. Exactly.
But anyway, unlike seemingly every modern case, the speech seems to have done little to affect the outcome of the trial because both men were sentenced to life in prison. While in jail, Loeb was eventually murdered by a former cellmate who attacked him with a razor.
Oh, shit, I called it.
Leopold was released in March of 1958, which means he would have served about 34 years of his life sentence. I think that's about right. And then he would die in 1971, which I never looked up their exact date of birth, but I think that puts him at about 65. So he didn't live a particularly long life.
As the alpha human.
Right. So that's the end of this. I was getting really worried when I started to get to the part talking about the defense and this. Oh, these poor wealthy boys had no choice but to murder somebody. And it's like, fuck, but it didn't work back then. So we have apparently, as a society and as a justice system, have grown dumber in the last 100 years.
I believe it.
But,
or dumber, or just more corrupted and shit. Because you said, it's that only happens for rich white kids.
Well, and that's what I thought until this week. There's a story in the news about that bus driver that raped a 14-year-old girl, and the judge was like, this is his first offense. He's never done anything else, so no jail time.
Okay, just white kids.
It's It's like, fuck, I'm 37. I didn't know I got a freebie, and I don't mean a free rape because that's no.
Right.
But I didn't know I got a free crime.
Yeah, I probably lost mine stealing some shit from the dollar store.
Fuck, that counted?
It's God damn it. I just thought it would be fun.
That's the thing. I try to get away with a murder, be like, hey, white boy here, that's my freebie. And they're like, you jaywalked once. And it's like, damn it.
You jaywalked 2 years ago. That was it.
The cop looked the other way. And like, shit.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's the tale of the perfect crime that was...
better than any other bungled murder.
Yeah, it sounds like it took them maybe a week to catch these guys.
If these people, if they had only lived a little bit longer, they could play Hitman and see just how every murder goes wrong.
Yeah, because there's all the little... It's easy to sit back and say, man, we could do this, and if we make a ransom note this way, and if we make sure our victim's relatively random, and we'll never get caught. But you can't account for all the little shit that happens.
Right.
And then the fact that the body was found within, an hour of it being dumped.
And you left shit there. You left your shit there. That is, baffling to me. Because your whole idea is, we're going to craft this perfect crime and even get paid for it. And it's whoops, my personal shit that could only be attached to me fell out my pocket. That is somebody who I would almost believe you wanted to be caught. Because it's if you weren't the dumbest son of a bitch on the planet, I would believe you'd be like, oh, whoops, did I drop that?
And it's such poetic justice that the only reason they could even trace those back, because this was 1923, it's not like they had DNA evidence or hair, analysis or that kind of stuff. the only reason they could track it back is because these were these affluent, cocky-ass bastards that had to have these one-of-a-kind glasses.
Yeah.
Like...
Can't slip up on style, my friend.
No. So, yeah, that's my story. Loeb and Leopold.
Well, thanks, guys, for, it's all worth it. The mental, scarring of all those people involved and stuff. It's all worth it for us to do this dumb fucking show, right? That's how it evens out.
His family's done suffering because they're all grown and dead.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, it also shows you how much these people didn't identify with humanity when they're like, well, what's a crime we could do that would get attention?
Yeah.
Murder, but not just any murder. Child murder.
Well, kill a kid. Like, that's you have to look for, like, when we do these stories about just real evil people, like, we have to kind of find the little bit of, like, redeeming qualities of these stories, and the only redeeming quality of this is, like, they failed so fucking hard that it's like, well, good, at least they don't get the satisfaction of, like, actually pulling it off, Right. And that's the great thing about the people in search of the perfect crime. They really only have to fuck up once, and then they never get another shot at it again.
Exactly. And imagine this from Loeb's perspective. He was the one that wanted that it was his idea, and it was his goal to pull off the perfect crime. And then Leopold's like, yeah, I'll go along with that. Then Leopold's the one that fucked it all up.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Loeb kind of did too, but it sounds like for the time he probably would have got away with it without Leopold's glasses and bragging to the news and making sure that he was getting personal attention.
He probably wouldn't have had the balls to do it either if he didn't have.
Yeah. And so it's no wonder that Loeb quickly, it's like, oh yeah, this happened, but it was Leopold, because he was pissed at him. He's like, execute that motherfucker. Don't even ask him any questions.
Well,
murder.
Good shit.
It's entertaining.
Yeah. We hope you feel better about whatever's going on in your life. Yeah, we're done now, but we'll be back again next week.
You can't keep us away.
Apparently. We've been trying.
Yeah. It's getting awful close, because there's been a lot of weeks where I'm like, shit, need a topic.
Yeah, I think we'll do episode 15, like maybe take a week off after that or something, because I'm feeling the pressure too.
Yes.
But, like, if they want to prove how fucking, like, alpha human they are, they should have tried doing a podcast every week.
Podcast a week.
It's tough shit.
Not just any podcast, a variety podcast.
This is tough, man.
I don't know. I know lots of people do them, and I don't know how they do it, because But that's what... We'll soldier through. Yeah. We'll survive. Don't worry about us.
Yeah. Just, donate a can of soup here and there, and we'll get through it.